On a gray Wednesday afternoon in Providence, the doors of municipal court swing open and a senator's wife walks in. Like she's arriving at a charity gala, not a criminal hearing. Lauren Ellison, 45, diamond bracelet flashing under the fluorescent lights, takes her place at the defendant's table, convinced this is just a small inconvenience money and influence will erase. What she doesn't know is that tonight her last name won't save her. Not from the security footage, not from the wounded veteran whose car she hit, and definitely not from the one man in this room she cannot charm, threaten, or outrun, Judge Frank Caprio. Because in a few minutes, Lauren will pull out her phone in open court, call her powerful husband on speaker, and hear him say the one thing she never expected. Before we dive into this unbelievable moment of justice, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you love stories where no one stands above the law, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The clock on the courtroom wall read 2:47 p.m. when Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses, opened the thick case file before him, and spoke the name that had already lit up every local news station, Lauren Ellison. A hush fell over the room, the kind that rolls in when people sense they're about to witness something larger than a routine hearing. The air felt weighted by curiosity, by frustration, by the unspoken question everyone carried. Would her political connections get her out of this? Lauren stepped forward with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to microphones, galas, and front-row seats at policy dinners. She wore an emerald blouse under a tailored cream coat, her hair meticulously done, her perfume unmistakably expensive, even from several feet away. Nothing about her demeanor suggested remorse, panic, or fear. If anything, she looked slightly annoyed, like someone who had been forced to cancel a lunch reservation. Beside her stood her attorney, Richard Hale. His navy suit, polished shoes, and effortless smirk made it abundantly clear he was the kind of lawyer who wasn't just connected, he was the connection. The type who knew every senator by first name and every judge by golf handicap. The type who walked into a courtroom convinced he'd win before anyone spoke a word. Judge Caprio greeted them with the calm civility he gave every defendant. But his eyes, sharp, discerning, missed nothing. "Mrs. Ellison," he began, "you stand charged with driving under the influence, leaving the scene of an accident and failure to render aid. Do you understand the charges?" Lauren nodded with an expression that said she understood the words, but not the gravity. Caprio flipped to the police report as the courtroom watched, breath held. Let's review the sequence of events. And just like that, the story shifted, transporting everyone back 9 nights earlier into the cool darkness of a Providence shopping center parking lot. It was 9:45 p.m. The lot was quiet, the neon pharmacy sign flickering overhead. A 2012 Lexus GX, gleaming silver under the streetlights, entered the frame of a security camera. But its movements were wrong, uneven. The kind of weaving that made the security guard watching the feed mutter under his breath. Inside that Lexus sat Lauren Ellison, eyes glazed, lips parted slightly, her hand gripping the wheel too loosely. She was alone, her breath thick with the heavy sweetness of Chardonnay. As she attempted to turn into another row of parking spaces, the Lexus drifted wide, too wide. The impact was sudden and violent. Metal slammed against metal, the sickening crunch echoing across the empty lot. The Honda Accorda faded red sedan with peeling paint, and a dented fender shook on its suspension like it had taken a punch. Its alarm blared through the still night, headlights flashing like distress signals. Inside the Lexus, Lauren jerked forward, visibly startled, but only for a moment. She opened her door, stumbling slightly as her heels scraped the asphalt. She approached the Honda with a slow, unsteady gait, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the damage. A crushed rear panel, a shattered taillight, a trunk now misaligned. She crouched, examined it. A full 30 seconds, passed long enough to understand the cost, long enough to know someone's life was about to get more complicated. Then, After a glance over her shoulder, she stood up, brushed off her coat, and returned to her SUV, without leaving a note, without calling anyone, without so much as a backward look. The Lexus drove away. The Honda stayed behind, wounded and alone. Back in the courtroom, the footage froze on the moment Lauren made her choice. The room reacted as Oni gasps, headshakes, whispers. Even the bailiff's jaw tightened. Judge Caprio let the silence settle before he spoke. That Honda belonged to a man named Samuel Walker. He lifted a page from the file. 68 years old, U.S. Army veteran, served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. That night, he was inside the pharmacy picking up medication for his wife, who suffers from severe rheumatoid arthritis. Their sedan is the only vehicle they own that she can easily get into. Lauren's jaw tightened, just barely, but it was something. The judge continued, his voice steady but weighted. Mr. Walker returned to the parking lot to find his car severely damaged. No note, no information, no attempt by the person responsible to check if anyone was harmed. That landed like a stone dropped into a still pond, ripples of disapproval sweeping through the crowd. Lauren's attorney cleared his throat and leaned in, whispering something to her. She lifted her chin higher, folding her hands primly in front of her. But the story wasn't done. Police located Mrs. Ellison at her residence at 10:25 p.m., Caprio read. A breathalyzer test administered at 10:32 indicated a blood alcohol concentration of 14. More murmurs. A 14 meant she wasn't just buzzed, she was dangerously drunk. Caprio continued. Investigators estimate her BAC at the time of the collision was closer to 16. Lauren swallowed. Her attorney placed a reassuring hand on her forearm, whispering confidently. But Caprio wasn't finished. According to Officer Carla Reed, the judge said, upon arrival at the Ellison residence, Mrs. Ellison repeatedly asked officers if they understood who her husband was. Lauren's composure faltered, eyes darting, lips pressing tight. The judge looked up, meeting her gaze directly. Mrs. Ellison, do you dispute any part of the footage or the reports? She hesitated, but the room's pressure pushed her forward. I believe things may look worse than they actually were, Your Honor. I was startled. I didn't think the damage was that serious, and I didn't realize I needed to report parking lot incidents. I thought. She paused, recalibrated. I thought it would be handled through insurance. A clever pivot. A rehearsed one. Caprio raised an eyebrow. Handled by insurance. Mrs. Ellison, that Honda is the only means of transportation for an elderly veteran caring for his ill wife. He has a $1,000 deductible he cannot afford. Do you understand that your decision to leave had real consequences? Lauren's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Richard Hale intervened smoothly. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets. Caprio lifted a hand. Mr. Hale, I will give you your time, but right now, I'm asking Mrs. Ellison. She took a breath. Your Honor, this has all been blown out of proportion. I never meant harm. I'm sure Mr. Walker's fine, and we plan to resolve everything quietly. That word quietly hung in the air like a challenge. Caprio repeated it softly. Quietly. He leaned back. Mr. Walker did not get the luxury of quiet, Mrs. Ellison. He had to file police reports, contact insurance, worry about how he'd take his wife to her physical therapy appointments. Quiet is for those who can afford to silence consequences. Mr. Walker cannot. Her cheeks flushed a soft, irritated pink. Hale stepped in again, trying to steer the tone back toward diplomacy, but the tide had already turned, and Lauren could feel it. The room was shifting, public sentiment aligning against her, reality pushing in on the fortress of privilege she'd been sheltered in for years, and she hated it. Her hand twitched, reaching instinctively toward her purse. But not for that moment. That disastrous choice would come later. For now, she straightened, exhaled, and set her expression into one of polite endurance, as though she were tolerating a long speech at a fundraiser. But the mood in the courtroom was different. Warmer toward Sam, colder toward her. And Judge Caprio, steady, patient, unwavering, was far from finished with the truth of that night. Judge Caprio let a long breath slip out, the kind that signaled both composure and controlled disappointment. He flipped another page of the case file, revealing a neatly stapled stack of documents, police statements, officer notes, and the formal charges themselves. The courtroom's wooden benches seemed to creak under the collective anticipation. "Mrs. Ellison," he began, his tone measured but unmistakably firm, "the facts of this case are not ambiguous. Let us proceed." Richard Hale stepped forward, clearly sensing the rising tension. He adjusted his cufflinks, a small, habitual gesture of someone accustomed to reclaiming control. "If it pleases the court," he said smoothly, "I believe it would be beneficial to discuss certain details privately. Given my client's position in the community and her husband's public office, it may be no." The single word landed with force. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his tone cut through the room, slicing Hale's request cleanly in half. "This is a public courtroom," Caprio continued. "There are no special sidebars to shield public figures from public accountability. Every word spoken here remains on the record. If your client's conduct cannot withstand scrutiny, then the issue lies with the conduct, not the scrutiny." A murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. Hale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he composed himself, nodding as if he had expected that response all along. "Very well, Your Honor," he said. "Then let me clarify. Mrs. Ellison has never before been involved in any criminal matter, traffic or otherwise. She is a dedicated community member. Her husband has spent years advocating for criminal justice reform, education equity." "Mr. Hale," Caprio interrupted, calm but unyielding, "her husband's legislative record is not evidence in this case. We are not here to discuss his resume. We are here to determine accountability for what your client did." Hale's mouth snapped shut. Lauren's eyes flicked sideways at him, narrowing slightly, as if blaming him for not being persuasive enough. But Caprio wasn't done. "You stated your client regrets her actions," he said. "Yet she has made no contact with Mr. Walker, no effort to acknowledge the harm she caused, and she left the scene immediately after the collision. That does not reflect regret. It reflects evasion." He tapped the file once, lightly, almost rhythmically. "Let's continue with the evidence." At his signal, the clerk dimmed the lights slightly and replayed the security camera footage on the courtroom's monitor. The collision, the stumble, the cold inspection, the silent escape, all played again. Except this time, Caprio narrated. "Notice the way she examines the damage. No stumbling at this moment, no panic. She is clearly aware of the impact. The alarm rings for 14 seconds. She spends another 16 looking over the vehicle." The footage continued. "Only after ensuring no one is watching does she return to her car and flee the scene." He paused the video on the frame where Lauren's face was most visible, dimly lit by the parking lot lamps, eyes darting around with calculation rather than confusion. "This," Caprio said quietly, "is not shock. This is a decision." The room fell into a heavy silence. A single cough echoed from the back row. Lauren shifted in her seat, crossing her legs, then uncrossing them, trying to maintain composure as dozens of eyes bore into her. "Your Honor," she finally said, her voice slightly strained. "Kerr was frightened. It was dark. The impact startled me. I thought I'd just hit a cart, or maybe a post at first." Caprio looked down at the printed photo of the damaged Honda in front of him, then back up at her. "A cart does not cause this," he said, holding the image up for the room to see. The crushed taillight, the dented panel, the bent trunk frame. Lauren swallowed. "I only left because I needed to get home," she tried again. "It had been a long day, and with everything happening with my husband's schedule, Mrs. Ellison," Caprio cut in gently but firmly, "you cannot blame fatigue for a 14 blood alcohol concentration, nor for leaving a disabled veteran without transportation, nor for walking away without reporting the damage. These were your choices." She opened her mouth again, but Hale placed a steadying hand on her wrist. A silent signal. Stop talking. But Caprio had more. He reached for the police report. According to Officer Reed's statement, when she and her partner arrived at your residence, your first words were not, "Is everyone okay?" They were, he read directly from the page. "Do you know who my husband is?" A wave of disapproval swept the courtroom. Someone exhaled loudly. Another shook their head. It was the kind of collective reaction that couldn't be ignored. Lauren's cheeks flushed crimson. "I was upset," she insisted. "I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking clearly enough to use your husband's position," Caprio replied. "You were thinking clearly enough to refuse a breathalyzer until threatened with automatic suspension. You were thinking clearly enough to demand officers focus on real crimes." Lauren clenched her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Hale attempted to intervene. "Your Honor, I believe we're drifting away from the central facts. My client is willing to cover the damages in full. This matter need not be dragged into the court of public opinion." Caprio raised his gaze, fixing him with a stare that made the attorney physically step back. "Mr. Hale, the central facts are precisely what we are addressing, and the court of public opinion is not my concern. Transparency, fairness, and truth are." Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned back to Lauren. "Mrs. Ellison, you said earlier this has been exaggerated. Let us be clear. There is no exaggeration in video footage, no exaggeration in breathalyzer results, no exaggeration in your own recorded statements." He leaned forward. "And certainly no exaggeration in the reality Mr. Walker now faces because of your actions." The tension was suffocating. Lauren's eyes glistened, not with remorse, but with irritation, humiliation, and an unmistakable simmering anger. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again, voice carefully measured. "Your Honor, my family is prepared to pay whatever the damages are. We want to resolve this respectfully, quietly, without further spectacle." That word again, quietly. And this time it landed differently, sharper, colder, more entitled. Caprio repeated it one more time, softly, quietly. He set down the file, folded his hands atop it, and studied her with a gaze that saw straight through excuses. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "you wish for quiet because consequences are inconvenient to you. But Mr. Walker has no such shield. His wife's medical appointments cannot be kept quietly. His insurance deductible cannot be paid quietly. His life cannot resume quietly." Lauren stiffened, lips tightening into a brittle line. Hale attempted one more lifeline. "Your Honor, may we request leniency, given her otherwise exemplary record?" Caprio lifted a hand, and Hale stopped immediately. "This court," he said calmly, "does not measure character by gala attendance, political proximity, or the absence of prior arrests. Character is measured by choices, especially the ones made when we think no one is watching." He looked again at the frozen image on the monitor. Lauren walking away from the damaged Honda. On that night, Mrs. Ellison, someone was watching. He tapped the still image gently. A camera. And now, a courtroom. Lauren's breathing quickened, her face stiff with frustration, but she said nothing more. And though she didn't know it yet, this was still the calm before the storm. Because the real explosion, the moment this case would become unforgettable, was only minutes away, waiting for her own hand to ignite it. The courtroom lights brightened again, as the clerk raised the blinds, letting a blade of afternoon sun spill across the polished wooden floor. It illuminated the defendant's table, Lauren Ellison, rigid in her chair, jaw tight, fingers clasped so firmly they trembled slightly. She wasn't used to losing control of a narrative. And today, despite her careful grooming and confident entrance, she could feel it slipping through her perfectly manicured hands. Judge Caprio turned the page in the file, revealing the victim impact statement. A thin, stapled document, but one that carried far more weight than all of Lauren's excuses combined. "Let's talk about the man whose life you affected," he said, lifting the statement gently, almost respectfully. Mr. Samuel Walker. Lauren's eyes flicked away toward the back of the courtroom. She hadn't looked at him once. Not when she walked in. Not during the video playback. Not even now. Sam Walker sat in the third row. A man who looked older than his 68 years, with weathered hands and a quiet, stoic posture. His posture was straight, dignified military grade, unmistakably. He wore a worn brown jacket and a blue baseball cap with a faded unit patch across the front. The kind of cap men wore not to show off, but to remember. Caprio began reading aloud. Mr. Walker writes that he parked his Honda near the pharmacy to pick up medication for his wife, who suffers from advanced rheumatoid arthritis. Her condition makes even the simplest movements painful. She depends on him for transportation. The judge looked up just long enough to lock eyes with Lauren. He states that upon returning to the parking lot, he found his vehicle severely damaged. No note. No contact information. No witness waiting to explain. Only an alarm still faintly echoing and a long scrape across his car. Lauren felt the air in her lungs sharpen, but she kept her composure, or tried to. Caprio continued. He writes that his insurance deductible is $1,000. He and his wife live on a fixed income. He does security work overnight to make ends meet. He had to call their daughter at midnight to help get his wife out of the house the next morning because the Honda was no longer drivable. Hale shifted uncomfortably. Lauren's lips drew thin. And he writes this, Caprio said. His voice softened, not out of pity, but out of respect for the words. I've served this country most of my life. I've never asked for special treatment. I don't expect it now, but I also didn't expect to be treated like I didn't matter. The sentence hung in the air, heavy, painful. True. Lauren flinched, just barely. The judge lowered the paper. Mr. Walker does not portray himself as a victim seeking sympathy. He simply describes the reality you created, Mrs. Ellison. Lauren's throat tightened. Your Honor, I understand that. But no, Caprio said quietly. You do not understand. Not yet. Her mouth closed again. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Ellison, have you reached out to Mr. Walker? Have you apologized? Have you offered assistance? Lauren inhaled sharply, beginning to speak, but Hale answered first. Your Honor, counsel advised that she refrain from contacting the victim until Caprio cut him off instantly. Legal strategy does not erase moral obligation, Mr. Hale. Your client left the scene. She knew she caused damage. She knew someone else would pay the price for her choices. 9 days have passed. 9 days of silence. Lauren's face flushed anger, embarrassment, defiance, all wrestling beneath the surface. I was planning to address everything once we sorted out the facts, she attempted. The facts are sorted, Caprio replied, tapping the file gently. They are right here. Lauren exhaled through her nose, controlled but brittle, like a porcelain figurine developing hairline cracks. Hale tried to redirect. Your Honor, Mrs. Ellison deeply regrets the misunderstanding. If Mr. Walker has endured hardship, we are prepared to compensate him fully. Caprio's eyes sharpened. Hardship is not something you get to quantify after the fact, Mr. Hale. It is something your client could have prevented by staying for 2 minutes and leaving a note. Lauren's composure wavered just for a flash. Her pupils trembled. Her jaw twitched. A flicker of genuine emotion. No frustration, not remorse. Caprio looked down again. This court takes victim statements seriously. Mr. Walker has been caring for his wife for 22 years. Her mobility is limited. Their car is essential. He paused. And the car you damaged is not just a vehicle. It is the lifeline of a family. Lauren's grip tightened on her purse handle. The slightest shaking betrayed the storm brewing inside her. Hale cleared his throat again, switching tone. Your Honor, with respect, we feel that the narrative is becoming unnecessarily dramatic. Mrs. Ellison is fully prepared to unnecessarily dramatic. Caprio repeated the words so quietly the room fell silent. He looked up, eyes now colder. Mr. Hale, Drama is when someone exaggerates. This, he lifted the victim statement, is a man's life. Hale froze. Lauren adjusted her posture, trying to regain the air of control she wore so effortlessly at fundraisers and press conferences. But here, under the fluorescent lights and the weight of accountability, the illusion was slipping. Caprio set aside the papers. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, his voice taking on a tone that drew every listener closer. "You left a veteran and elderly man caring for his disabled spouse to deal with the consequences alone. That is the truth." Lauren inhaled, ready to speak, but he held up a hand. "I do not doubt you want this resolved quickly, quietly, with as little disruption to your life as possible." Her stare faltered. "But accountability," he continued, "is rarely quiet." Silence enveloped the courtroom. Even the old radiator stopped humming, as though the building itself was listening. Lauren looked down at her hands. For the first time, she seemed unsure. Not remorseful, not yet, but unsettled, like a person realizing she'd misjudged the terrain. Caprio watched her for several seconds, studying the flickers of emotion crossing her face. Finally, he spoke again. "We will continue." He nodded to the bailiff. "Call Officer Reed." The double doors opened, and Officer Carla Reed entered, posture straight, uniform crisp, disciplined and confident. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a steady gaze. The courtroom's energy shifted as she approached the stand. Another voice of truth, another piece of the night Lauren wanted to forget, but Officer Reed's testimony, cold, factual, damning, was still moments away. For now, Lauren inhaled, adjusted her blouse, and prepared to endure the next blow. She didn't yet know that Officer Reed's words wouldn't just chip at her defense, they would shatter it completely. Officer Carla Reed stepped forward with the kind of steady, unhurried confidence that comes from years of doing a difficult job without flinching. Her boots echoed across the courtroom floor, one of those small sounds that somehow deepened the tension. Lauren watched her approach with a stiff expression, as if bracing for an unpleasant medical procedure. Officer Reed took the oath, sat down, and folded her hands neatly on the witness stand. Judge Caprio nodded for her to begin. "Officer Reed," he said, "describe your involvement in this case." "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. Her voice was calm, level, professional. "I was the responding officer on the night of July 14th, after a report of a hit-and-run incident at the Riverbend Shopping Center. Security provided us with footage showing a silver Lexus GX making contact with a parked vehicle and fleeing the scene." She glanced briefly at Lauren. Not hostile, just matter of fact. A witness provided a license plate number that matched a vehicle registered to Mrs. Lauren Ellison. Hale shifted, ready to object at the smallest provocation, but he held his fire. "We proceeded to the Ellison residence," Reed continued. "When we arrived at approximately 10:25 p.m., Mrs. Ellison answered the door." "And what was her demeanor?" Caprio asked. Reed didn't hesitate. "Dismissive, Your Honor." Lauren's head jerked slightly, not enough for most to notice, but enough to betray irritation. "She appeared unsteady on her feet," Reed said. "There was a strong odor of alcohol on her breath. Her eyes were glassy. Her speech was slightly slurred." Hale interjected immediately. "Officer, it was nearly 11 at night. My client was home, tired. And Mr. Hale," Caprio said without even glancing up, "you'll have your turn." Hale sat back, lips pressed into a tight line. Officer Reed continued. "Mrs. Ellison repeatedly asked if we knew who her husband was. She stated that this was a misunderstanding, that she was certain the matter would be handled internally." A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. Handled internally. The phrase tasted exactly like entitlement. Reed's tone didn't change. "We asked her to take a breathalyzer test. She initially refused and said this was a waste of police resources. When informed that refusal would result in an automatic suspension of her license, she agreed to take the test." "And the result?" Caprio asked. ".14, Your Honor." Another murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reed added. She then stated, and I quote, "My husband will take care of this. This is ridiculous." Lauren exhaled sharply through her nose, staring straight ahead. Embarrassment, anger, humiliation, they flickered across her face like shadows cast by passing headlights. Caprio nodded to the clerk. "Play the body camera audio." A soft click, then a faint hiss of static, and suddenly the room filled with Lauren's voice, the voice of a drunk woman used to power bending around her. "Do you know who my husband is? This is going to be taken care of. You're making this bigger than it is. This is a waste of time. My husband will fix it." Her words slurred, but unmistakably arrogant. The audio bounced off the courtroom walls like an indictment all its own. The gallery reacted, faces stiffening, eyebrows lifting, lips tightening in silent disapproval. When the audio ended, the silence was thick. Lauren sat frozen. Her fingers clenched around her purse so tightly it looked like she might tear the leather. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "that recording was taken 45 minutes after you struck Mr. Walker's vehicle and drove away. It does not sound like shock. It sounds like expectation that your husband's influence would shield you from accountability." She opened her mouth, but the judge's next words cut through the room like a blade. "Do you have anything to say before we continue?" Lauren inhaled sharply, summoning dignity from the scraps left around her. "Your Honor, I was stressed and upset. I said things I didn't mean," Caprio finished, "or didn't want recorded." The question stunned her into silence. Just then, the shift happened, the pivotal moment of the entire case. Lauren's right hand slipped into her purse. She pulled out her phone, and she started dialing. In the dead stillness of the courtroom, the faint electronic chirps of the keypad sounded like sirens. Everyone froze. Even the clerk, even Officer Reed, even Haley all turned toward her in disbelief. Judge Caprio's voice turned ice cold. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "what are you doing?" Lauren kept the phone to her ear. "I'm calling my husband," she said, annoyance leaking into every syllable. "He can clear this up. He knows what to say." A gasp erupted from someone in the gallery. Someone else muttered, "No way." But Lauren didn't notice, or didn't care. Caprio's expression hardened, an expression rarely seen, even by those who followed his cases religiously. "Put that phone down," he ordered. She didn't. She turned slightly away, shielding the phone with her hand, as though she were discussing brunch plans, not defying a court. "He needs to be here," she said. "He'll explain it. He'll talk to you. He knows Mrs. Ellison." Caprio's voice was no longer cold, it was dangerous. "That is contempt of court." Finally, Lauren lowered the phone, but the damage was done. The room buzzed like a disturbed hive. Hale rubbed his forehead, looking like he wanted to vanish into thin air. Caprio nodded to the bailiff. "Retrieve the phone." The bailiff approached, hand out. For a split second, Lauren hesitated, then relinquished the device like she was surrendering a piece of armor. Caprio looked at her, and his next words would become part of Rhode Island courtroom legend. "You called your husband. Very well. We'll call him too, but it will be done properly on the record." Lauren's face went pale. "Your Honor, no, please. We are going to speak with Senator Ellison," Caprio said firmly, "right here, in this courtroom, in front of every person present." The gallery erupted into a stunned whisper. Lauren shook her head slowly, lips parted in horror. "Please don't involve him in this." "He didn't. You already involved him," Caprio said, "when you attempted to use his position to escape accountability." He turned to the clerk. "Contact Senator Marcus Ellison's office. Put the call on speaker." Hale exhaled sharply. "Your Honor, I strongly object." "Object all you want," Caprio said without even glancing at him. "This is happening." Lauren pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, blinking rapidly as if she could rewind the last 30 seconds, undo the colossal mistake she just made. But it was far too late. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. Every breath hovered on the edge of anticipation. and in the front row, Sam Walker watched quietly, his face unreadable. The clerk dialed. 1 ring. 2. 3. Lauren squeezed her eyes shut, as if bracing for impact. On the 4th ring, the speaker crackled, and a familiar voice filled the courtroom. "Hello? This is Senator Marcus Ellison." What came next would unravel Lauren's entire world. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, no one spoke. The courtroom, packed with reporters, citizens, and curious bystanders, was silent enough to hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then Judge Caprio leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady, formal, unmistakably authoritative. "Senator Ellison," he said, "this is Judge Frank Caprio of the Providence Municipal Court. You are on speakerphone. Your wife is present before me as a defendant in a hearing regarding DUI charges and leaving the scene of an accident. A moment ago, she attempted to call you in the middle of active proceedings." Another silence followed, but it was different, filled with weight, recognition, and something like dread. On the other end, Marcus Ellison exhaled slowly. "I see," he said. His voice was composed, but underneath it trembled something raw, conflict, disappointment, and the unmistakable strain of a man suddenly forced into the center of a moral reckoning. Lauren's eyes shot open. She stared at the phone on the clerk's desk, as if it were a ticking bomb. She mouthed the word, "please," barely audible even to herself. Caprio didn't glance at her. "I've placed this call on speaker," he continued, "because your wife attempted to enlist your help during her hearing. The court believes transparency is necessary." A long pause. Then, "Understood, Your Honor." His calmness rattled Lauren more than if he had shouted. Caprio folded his hands. "Senator, would you like to make a statement regarding your wife's actions and her attempt to contact you during court proceedings?" For a moment, all anyone could hear was Lauren's shaky breathing. Then Marcus spoke. "Your Honor, first, let me apologize. My wife had absolutely no right to call me during a hearing. That is inappropriate and a violation of courtroom protocol. I'm deeply sorry that you and your staff were put in that position." Lauren flinched like his words were physical blows. "Marcus, stop," she whispered under her breath, but the microphone still picked it up faintly. Caprio lifted a hand to silence her. "Senator," he said evenly, "are you aware of the charges against your wife?" "Yes," Marcus answered. "I've been aware since the night of her arrest. I received the call when Officer Reed brought her in. I've reviewed the police report, the security footage, and the victim statement." Lauren's eyes widened. "You... what?" She had assumed he hadn't fully read everything, had hoped he wouldn't. "I have," Marcus said, his tone sharpening. "And I told you, Lauren, that you needed to take full responsibility." She shook her head violently, her voice cracking. "Marcus, not like this. Please." He continued speaking as though he hadn't heard her, or perhaps because he finally needed to say what he'd been holding in. "Your Honor, I want to be absolutely clear. I am not requesting leniency. I am not invoking my position. I am not asking for special treatment for my wife. In fact," he exhaled deeply, heavily, "I expect you to treat her like any other defendant." The room absorbed that sentence like a shockwave. Lauren's hand flew to her chest. "Marcus, why are you saying this?" There was pain in Marcus's voice now, the pain of a husband grappling with the gap between love and principle. "Because, Lauren, you hit a man's car and left," he said. "You walked away from a veteran who served this country. You tried to intimidate police officers with my name. And now you've tried to involve me again, in the middle of a courtroom. That's not just a mistake. That's a pattern." Her lip trembled. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, anyone to save her from the humiliation. No one moved. Marcus inhaled shakily. "Your Honor, my father was a decorated soldier. He served in the same unit Mr. Walker did, years earlier. I grew up being taught that people like him deserve respectful ways. The fact that my wife treated him as though he were invisible is," his voice broke, "deeply shameful." A ripple of compassion moved through the courtroom, not for Lauren, but for him. Caprio nodded respectfully. Senator, do you have anything further you wish to put on the record? Yes, Marcus replied. Your Honor, whatever sentence you deem appropriate, I will support. I love my wife, but love cannot override accountability. Lauren stared at the speakerphone, as if it had turned to ash in front of her. Marcus, stop, please. This is not fair. This is not how you support your family, Marcus heard her. And when he spoke again, his voice was soft but immovable. Lauren, supporting you does not mean enabling you. You made choices. Now they have consequences. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not a tear of remorse, but the kind born from the collapse of entitlement. Caprio nodded once to the clerk. Thank you, Senator. This court appreciates your honesty. Thank you, Your Honor. Marcus replied, quietly, steadily, and good luck. The line went silent. The clerk ended the call. For several seconds, no one breathed. Lauren stood there, inert, like a statue carved from disbelief. Then her legs seemed to buckle slightly as she lowered herself back into her seat. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy, not from sorrow, but from the shock of hearing her last shield crumble in front of an entire courtroom. Judge Caprio let the silence stay, just long enough for the gravity to settle. Then he spoke, voice steady and unflinching. Mrs. Ellison, he said, the man you attempted to call for help has just asked this court to hold you to the same standard as any other citizen. And that is exactly what will happen. Lauren swallowed hard. Her throat clicked audibly. She tried to compose herself, but her mask was shattered, broken by her own hand, her own call, her own arrogance. Caprio continued, Your husband's integrity is commendable, but this hearing is about you, not him. Lauren's voice cracked as she whispered, I didn't think this would go this far. That, Caprio replied quietly, is the essence of privilege. The assumption that consequences are optional. They are not. She blinked rapidly, her composure fraying at the edges. Caprio leaned slightly forward, his tone shifting from stern to instructively moral. This courtroom is not a place where power shields wrongdoing. It is where all people, regardless of name, status, or influence, stand equal before the law. He gestured toward the gallery, toward the rows of silent observers who had watched this unfold with a mix of shock and vindicated truth. You attempted to use your husband's position to control the outcome of this hearing. Instead, the outcome is clearer than ever. He sat back. We will proceed. What followed would define the next chapter of Lauren's life. But as she sat there trembling, stripped of control, stripped of protection, and stripped of illusion, she understood something for the first time. This was no longer a story about her escaping consequences. This was the moment her life collided with them, and the impact would be far more lasting than the one that shattered Sam Walker's car. The atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted the moment the call with Senator Ellison ended. It wasn't just quiet, it was charged. A mix of disbelief, vindication, and a strange, solemn respect for the man who had just chosen principle over protection. But for Lauren Ellison, the room had never felt more hostile. She sat stiffly, her hands twisted together in her lap, knuckles bone white. Her lips trembled, as though she were fighting back tears, but not the kind born from regret, the kind born from humiliation. Judge Caprio allowed the silence to settle before he spoke. Mrs. Ellison, he said, we will now move forward with sentencing. Lauren lifted her eyes to him wide, shimmering, pleading. Your Honor, please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Everything has spiraled out of control. It spiraled, Caprio replied calmly, because you pushed it downhill. Her breath hitched. Let us review. He lifted the file, flipping through the pages slowly, making each turn feel deliberate, heavy, unmistakable. First, we have the security footage showing you driving under the influence and striking Mr. Walker's vehicle with significant force. Flip. Second, we have your BAC results nearly double the legal limit. Flip. Third, the footage shows you examining the damage for 30 seconds. long enough to understand the severity, and choosing to leave without reporting it. Flip. Fourth, your own statements, recorded on body camera, asserting your husband's political position as a shield. Flip. And finally, Caprio said, closing the file gently, your attempt to call your husband in the middle of these proceedings. Lauren's shoulders curled inward, as if she were trying to fold herself into invisibility. Hale rose. Your Honor, we maintain that while mistakes were made, this punishment should be proportionate. Hale, Caprio said, sit down. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't harsh, but it was decisive enough to stop the seasoned attorney mid-step. He sat, hard. Caprio turned back to Lauren. Mrs. Ellison, your husband spoke with great integrity today, but this is your case, your responsibility, your consequences. Lauren swallowed. Her eyes glistened, but they held no sincerity, only desperation. I understand, she whispered. I hope you do, Caprio replied, because now this court will determine the full measure of accountability. He took a breath. For the charge of driving under the influence, he said, I am imposing a fine of $1,000. You will complete the mandatory alcohol education program and surrender your license for 1 year. Lauren's breath faltered, her chin quivering. For leaving the scene of an accident, he continued, an additional fine of $500 and 80 hours of community service. She flinched not at the fines, but at the words, community service. The idea of it pierced her pride more sharply than any monetary penalty. For failure to render aid, he said, a fine of $250. Now her face flushed, a deep red guiltless anger. And for contempt of court, for attempting to use a phone during active proceedings, a $500 fine. Hale shifted in his seat. Lauren blinked rapidly, her breathing uneven. Caprio wasn't finished. In total, your fines amount to $2,250. Lauren exhaled shakily. She could handle that. Money wasn't the issue. Pride was. But, Caprio said, pausing long enough for the stillness to sharpen, this court finds financial penalties insufficient. Her head jerked up. Caprio continued, you will pay full restitution to Mr. Walker. According to the insurance estimate, that is $4,300 for repairs, plus his $1,000 deductible. $7,300 in total restitution. Lauren let out a soft, strangled sound, not of remorse, but of disbelief at how public and thorough this punishment was becoming. And, Caprio added, you must write a formal letter of apology to Mr. Walker and Officer Reed. Both letters must be reviewed by this court before delivery. Lauren pressed her palms against her eyes, attempting to contain the tremor in her lips. But the most important part of your sentence, the judge continued, is your community service. She froze. You will complete your 80 hours at the Providence Veterans Outreach Program. A collective murmur swept across the gallery. Even Hale's eyebrows shot upward. Lauren slowly lifted her head, looking stricken. I have to work with veterans, she whispered. Yes, Caprio said, the very people your actions disregarded. Lauren's chest rose and fell quickly now. Your Honor, I don't think I'm qualified for that sort of work. That, Caprio answered, is precisely why it is necessary. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, no sound coming out. You will transport elderly veterans to medical appointments, Caprio continued, assist them with mobility when needed, help them navigate VA paperwork and services, and you will learn, Mrs. Ellison, through first-hand experience, what responsibility looks like when lives, not reputations, depend on it. Lauren shook her head slowly. It's too much, Caprio echoed. Mr. Walker's life was upended. His wife's care was disrupted. He faced financial stress, emotional distress, and fear over how to keep his household functioning. He did nothing wrong. He leaned forward. You did. Lauren's breath trembled. Consequences, Caprio said softly, feel overwhelming only to those who expected none. Her eyes brimmed with tears now hot, resentful tears. Hale stood again, voice strained. Your Honor, this sentence seems disproportionately harsh, especially for someone who Caprio cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Hale, had your client been a 20-year-old working-class defendant who struck a car, fled the scene, and attempted to invoke a parent's authority, I assure you the consequences would be the same. If anything, leniency is more often granted to those with fewer resources, not more. He turned back to Lauren. You will complete every hour, every requirement, and you will report to this court with proof of completion. Lauren blinked, stunned into silence. Caprio glanced into the gallery. Mr. Walker, he said, would you like to address the court? Sam Walker stood slowly, aging joints stiff, but posture still disciplined. He removed his cap, holding it respectfully against his chest. Your Honor, he began, his voice quiet but steady. I just want to say thank you. Lauren looked at him for the first time, really looked. Sam continued, I'm not a man who needs special treatment. I never asked for any. But that night, I felt invisible, like I didn't matter. Today, you reminded me that I do. Caprio nodded, visibly moved. You have always mattered, Mr. Walker. Sam gave a small, respectful bow of his head and sat back down. Lauren's shoulders fell. The weight of every eye in the courtroom pressed around her, and for the first time since entering, she didn't look regal, or confident, or untouchable. She looked small. Caprio tapped his gavel once. Mrs. Ellison, you may step down and meet with the clerk to begin processing your sentence. Lauren stood slowly, legs trembling. As she passed Sam Walker, she didn't look at him. Couldn't. Not yet. Outside the courtroom, the news cameras were already gathering. The world was waiting to see the fallen politician's wife emerge from a courtroom no longer shielded by status. Inside, the gallery exhaled a long collective release of tension. Justice had not only been done, it had been witnessed. And as Lauren disappeared through the side door with the clerk, the cost of her actions, financial, social, emotional, had only just begun. News travels quickly in Providence, but stories like Lauren Ellison's, they don't just travel, they explode. By the time she stepped out of the courthouse's side, exit escorted by Hale, avoiding the front doors, where cameras waited, the clip of Judge Caprio putting her husband on speakerphone had already hit social media. Within an hour, it was on every local broadcast. Within 3 hours, national commentators were quoting lines from the hearing, especially the moment Senator Ellison said, "Treat her like any other defendant." For some, it became a symbol of integrity. For others, a cautionary tale of arrogance unraveling in real time. But for Lauren herself, the real consequences began after the camera stopped rolling. 3 days after the hearing, Senator Marcus Ellison stood behind a podium at a press conference. His face was drawn, exhausted but resolute. The crowd waited, knowing they were about to hear the statement that would shape his political future. My wife's actions, he said, were unacceptable, and her refusal to take responsibility is something I cannot support. Out of respect for the citizens who entrusted me with this office, and out of respect for my own principles, I have chosen to step back from several leadership positions in the Senate. Gasps, whispers, the clicking of cameras. And effective immediately, Marcus added, his voice tightening, my wife and I will be separating. Reporters shouted questions. Is this permanent? Did the hearing influence your decision? How is your family handling this? Marcus simply said, integrity has to come before comfort, in public service and in private life. The video went viral. Approval ratings that had dipped during Lauren's scandal surged upward. Comment sections flooded with praise for his honesty, something rare in politics. But while the senator's reputation recovered, Lauren's did not. Her friends stopped returning calls. Her social circles quietly distanced themselves. Invitations vanished. Even the charity committees she chaired found polite excuses to replace her. But the greatest consequence came not from social fallout. It came from the one thing she couldn't charm, bribe, or control: community service. Her first day at the Providence Veterans Outreach Program began on a rainy Monday morning. Gray skies, damp sidewalks, a chill that seemed to sink deeper into Lauren's bones than she'd expected. She stepped through the entrance doors, expecting at least some form of orientation from an administrator. Instead, a receptionist handed her a clipboard. "Sign in," she said. "Someone will show you around." That someone turned out to be Harold Greene, 73-year-old retired Marine with silver hair, a slow but steady gait, and the unmistakable bearing of a man who understood discipline better than most judges. He extended a hand. "You're the new volunteer." Lauren nodded tightly. "Yes. I'm here for my community service hours." Harold studied her for a second longer than was comfortable. Not with judgment, with curiosity, as if trying to figure out what kind of person stood in front of him. "Well," he said finally, "follow me." He walked her through the modest facility waiting area, resource office, transportation board, the small room where volunteers assisted veterans with paperwork. "This isn't glamorous work," Harold said as they walked. "You drive folks to VA appointments, help them in and out of cars, sit in lobbies with them, listen, mostly listen." Lauren nodded again, though her eyes wandered, taking in the peeling paint, the outdated furniture, the sense of wear that clung to the place like dust. Then Harold stopped in front of a corkboard filled with appointment cards. "You'll start with transportation," he said. "We have quite a few older folks who can't drive anymore." He pointed to a card. "Your first is at 11. Mr. Thomas Pierce, Vietnam vet, needs a lift to his neurology appointment." Lauren forced a polite smile. Of course. But beneath that smile was discomfort. Resentment. An internal whisper. "I don't belong here." That whisper followed her into the van, followed her through the city streets, followed her as she helped Mr. Pierce, a frail man with tremors in his hands, into the passenger seat. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice shaking but kind. "Appreciate it." Lauren murmured something polite but distant. It wasn't until day 5 that something shifted. By then she had driven half a dozen veterans to appointments, held bags, opened doors, helped people who moved slowly, or spoke with difficulty, or could no longer remember certain things they once knew. But it was day 5, Friday morning, when Harold handed her a card that made her breath catch. Samuel Walker, 1:15 p.m., VA clinic. She stared at the card so long, Harold finally asked, "Something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "No, it's fine." But it wasn't. Driving to the clinic, she gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her chest felt heavy. Words she knew she should have said 9 days ago clawed at her throat. When she pulled up, Sam Walker was waiting on a bench, leaning on a cane. He wore the same worn jacket, the same patch-covered cap. He approached slowly. "Afternoon," he said kindly. "You must be the volunteer?" She swallowed. "Yes, Mr. Walker." He opened the door and paused halfway in. Looked at her. Really looked. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You're her." Lauren nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes. I'm the one who—" He eased himself into the seat. "Well, I guess everyone ends up having to face what they did sooner or later." She drove in silence. Shame worked on her like a slow, persistent ache. At the clinic, as she helped him out of the van, Sam said softly, "You don't have to help me walk in. I know this is uncomfortable for you." But she did help him, all the way to the waiting room. A long moment passed. Lauren found herself nervously fidgeting with her sleeve. Finally, she whispered, "Mr. Walker, I'm sorry for everything." Sam looked at her with a gentleness she didn't expect. "I know," he said, "and I forgive you." Her breath caught. "But," he added, "forgiveness isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about hoping you won't repeat it." She nodded slowly. Tears she hadn't permitted herself began to form. "And one more thing," Sam said. "I didn't serve so people like you could have special privileges. I served so the law would apply to everyone equally." Lauren nodded harder now, her chest tight. "I understand," she whispered. "I really do." And for the first time, she meant it. Weeks passed. What began as humiliation slowly became education. By week 5, she was asking veterans about their service. By week 10, she was helping them fill out forms without being asked. By week 12, she no longer looked at the peeling paint or old furniture, but at the people. Their stories, their courage, their vulnerabilities. Harold, watching her, finally said, "You've changed." She didn't argue, because it was true. 6 months after the sentencing, Lauren requested a meeting with Sam. They sat in a small coffee shop. She came alone, no lawyer, no husband, no pretense. "Mr. Walker," she said, voice steady but emotional, "I hit your car and left. I disrespected you. I tried to use my husband's position to silence accountability. I was wrong." Sam folded his hands around his cup. "I know," he said quietly. "Thank you for saying it." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And I want you to know something," he added. "People fall. People break. But what matters is what you do after." "I'm trying," she whispered. He smiled gently. "I can see that." 1 year after her sentencing, Lauren completed her mandatory hours. Her license was reinstated. Her divorce finalized. Her social circles upended. But she continued to volunteer every Wednesday at the Veterans Outreach Program. Not because she was required to, because she had learned, finally, that respect was not inherited. It was earned, and justice, real justice, is not what protects the powerful. It's what protects the invisible. Life has a way of revealing who we truly are when all our safety nets collapse. Lauren Ellison walked into court believing her last name would shield her, that connections could erase consequences. But justice doesn't bend for titles, and Judge Frank Caprio reminded her, and all of us, that accountability is the foundation of any society worth living in. Her story is a reminder that responsibility is not something we escape, it's something we grow through. Even when mistakes break us open, what comes next? Humility, empathy, change is what defines our character far more than any reputation ever could. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what lesson stood out the most, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful courtroom stories, where compassion meets accountability, and where no one, no matter how privileged, stands above the law.